righty. Welcome, everybody, to episode number 11. No, sorry, episode number 12 of the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. I am your host, Bo Richards, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Dan Humphrey.
Greetings and salutations.
We hope everyone is doing well after one full week, or roughly a week of election and, dare I say, post-election fatigue and craziness.
Hard to believe it's only been a week.
I know. Yeah, it's a little crazy. And when I was writing up my notes for this, you always put a title of whatever we're going to talk about at the top, and I have post-election ? Because we. I mentioned last week that we were going to. Once we find out who wins, we'll have the podcast called post-election, and I think we have a pretty clear idea of who's going to win or who should win or has already been declared the winner. There's still some up in the air stuff going on, so we won't know.
It's not officially official yet.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And so that is kind of, that throws a nice, a good amount of like stress on the situation when you have the current president not conceding. Though I don't, to be fair, I don't blame him for not conceding.
Yeah, I mean, that's his personality, and he absolutely does have every right to challenge the count if there is suspicion of any fuckery. So, and I encourage the Democrats to let him do that to his heart's content. Spend all the money you want on lawyers. Mm-hmm. Let's get this right. Let there be no question as to the answer.
I agree with that. I do, however, think that you're taking too rational of approach to this.
How so?
Mr. Joe Biden, he had in a talk,
President-elect
Joe Biden, he had said that he finds it embarrassing that Trump won't concede the election, and he went on to say a couple of other things.
That's like saying his face is orange. Yeah. Of course, he's a fucking embarrassing person. That's not new. To me, I mean, I would not advise most people to take the path that he is as far as challenging stuff. Mm-hmm. But this is Trump we're talking about. So like his character or demeanor, we already know what we're getting in for. So to me, the point is, if he wants to challenge it, let him challenge it so it's nice and clear. That's all.
Well, and like I said, that's what I agree with. My pushback is specifically with what Biden said and how that differs from allowing Trump to do the thing he wants to do.
Sure, yeah.
And what it reminds me of is it's when someone has like an argument about something, whether it's crazy or not, the best thing to do is to argue it with them and to hear their point and to let them talk and then shut it down, not call them names.
Right. Or counter argue it.
That's what I mean.
Down. It's just like,
shut them down, counter argue it, do your thing. Like that's actually how things should be done. I mean, that's the classy thing to do. That's like the normal, the rational,
the adult move.
And I found it a very Trumpian of President-elect Joe Biden to claim that it's embarrassing that he won't step down simply because, or concede simply because that's actually not true. It isn't an embarrassing move for someone in a race to see who wins, to challenge the race to see if he can still win, because it's legal to do so. It's embarrassing because of all the things we've ever talked about Trump and how he's an embarrassing person. But the fact that he's an embarrassing individual doesn't mean that his actions, his legal actions to try and win a race are also embarrassing. It just kind of struck me as something that was very childish of Joe Biden to do. It seemed like he sort of lowered himself to that level of denigration versus rational argument and idea debating, and I just,
how high did you think he was?
Well, so that's kind of part of it. I mean, that's definitely a part of it, but I still feel like if you're trying to, between the two of them, he's the one who seems to sort of aim for the moral high ground.
Sure.
And then for whatever reason, he just decides here to be like, yeah, this is embarrassing. Like as if Joe Biden would concede if he was losing and he thought that there might be evidence of voter fraud. Whether that's realistic or not is irrelevant.
I think he might. In all honesty, I think that Trump is just not going down without a fight.
Sure.
I think it's absolutely clear that he's not going to get a second term, but the count's not official yet. And if you look at the numbers of the places, I think they have like 10 lawsuits going on. And they are doing things like challenging the validity of 700 votes in a state where Biden had like a 10,000 vote lead.
Yeah.
So even if they win these things, it's not going to change the election. Additionally, judges are throwing these out left and right.
I think they've all been, I think they're 0 for 12.
Yeah.
That's what I heard. I haven't verified that. So whoever's listening, maybe you can verify it for us. But I heard that they were 0 for 12.
Yeah. So it's, I think that's more that detail is important in terms of how Trump is presenting himself and, just putting up a useless fight. But that's his character.
Yeah.
He never admits anything.
No, very, very true. I will say this, though, to counter all the failures that seem to have been occurring. As of today, Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, has announced that the state will conduct a full hand recount of the election in their state.
Okay.
Basically as a result of Trump claiming voter fraud. But yeah, like you were saying, let him do his thing. Trump let him do his thing. And it's like, this is why you allow someone to articulate their argument. He's making an argument. He's like, this is my hypothesis. For him, it's real, but it's my hypothesis is that there's voter fraud. And then his lawyers are 0 for 12. And it's like, Biden doesn't need to come in and say, oh, that's so embarrassing. He just says, well, I told you so. Or maybe our system's not as corrupt as you think. Or too bad.
It's interesting. I think that of all the things being said right now, going on right now, that what would most likely be considered a very small comment by Biden, like that's what kind of stuck in your craw.
Yeah.
I think of so many other things on both sides, and it's caught your attention. Then he said, "Oh, it's embarrassing." That's interesting.
Well, I don't like when arguments are had that way. Like his rebuttal is wrong. Not simply because he's spouting, like he's saying something that's like factually incorrect or something. It's wrong because he's engaging in the wrong part of the argument. And this is supposed to be the apparent new leader of our free world. This, to be honest, this could be anyone else that we're talking about. It isn't the fact that it's Joe Biden. I just latched onto it because I thought that this individual said something that was quite dumb. It's like there are other ways to handle Trump's attempts to keep the presidency. Calling him embarrassing for exercising legal rights is not one of them. Now, if Trump was doing things that were illegal or were unconventional or frowned upon, yeah, then you can call it embarrassing. Like that's totally fine. Like his performance to some people in the debates was embarrassing. I thought it was par for the course because what I expected, but that might be a better use of that term. But his tweets are embarrassing. Right.
He's just an embarrassing individual.
Yeah, but his right to challenge the election where he legally can do so isn't embarrassing, I don't think, regardless of who it is, because it's part of our legal framework.
Sure.
And
I think within the context, so I totally agree with your point that, yeah, just let him do what he legally can to secure the victory. But if we add the context of 0 for 12, and the things that they're trying to argue, strategically, as a politician, that's fucking embarrassing.
Yeah.
To go after it that way. So I'll give Biden the benefit of the doubt on that one.
It's at least silly to say the least, and to do that sort of thing. But yeah, it's just there's been a couple of things like that President-elect Joe Biden has said that his word choice has just been curious to me.
Yeah. Or his speechwriter's word choice.
Yeah, like exactly. It's like they're very curious uses of different words. Like he could have easily just called this silly, and it would have gotten across the same exact point for pretty much everybody. And I wouldn't be in a upset at the moment because silly would be accurate.
I'll push back and I'll say maybe, maybe not, in the sense that the choice of words, and of course, obviously, you can speak to how you would receive that, and I can speak to how I would receive it, but any one individual doesn't mean shit in politics. It's groups of people and how statistically they respond to things. Yeah. So to call him embarrassing probably resonates more
that could
with
be true,
the general Democratic Party right now.
And I know we've established this before, but how I feel about these kinds of things tends to be different than how the average person feels about them.
Sure. Well, dude, you want to talk embarrassing? How about the Giuliani press conference?
I didn't hear it. Tell me more about it.
You didn't hear it?
No.
Oh my goodness. Yay. Okay, so Trump tweets out that there's going to be a press conference at the Four Seasons. I think this was 11 a.m. a couple, 3 days ago.
Okay.
Press conference to be expected. Giuliani's going to do his thing. Half an hour later, Trump tweets out again that the press conference will be held at the Four Seasons Landscaping Company in Philadelphia. Huh? And dude, you got to look this up. The visual is critical here. But the Four Seasons Landscaping Company is on the outskirts of Philadelphia, nowhere near the actual downtown area or anybody really. It is nestled comfortably between a porn shop and a crematorium. Yeah, gets better.
Oh my God.
So they set up the podium in the alley. So Giuliani is in the alley with a big, what they call a step and repeat. So all the little like Trump logos behind him as a background.
Yeah.
It's like taped up to the wall, surrounded by his cronies, and going off and just talking about ridiculous stuff. I mean, like it's pretty high level Giuliani type stuff.
Yeah.
At the Four Seasons Landscaping. And he makes all these ridiculous claims and then just scuttles off and takes zero questions. Dude, it's fucking incredible. It is. You got to see it. Make it a point to look that one up, dude. It's
Do you know
priceless.
what some of the crazy things were that he said?
I forget because exactly how he stated it really speaks to how weird the whole fucking thing was. Like I would want to say it exactly right because his words, each and individual one was like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But mainly it was accusations of like dead people voting. Okay. And he mentioned that.
Yeah, I've heard that's a thing that.
Yeah.
Can occur.
And again, that's like, handful of votes versus 100,000 lead or whatever. So that's a silly thing to chase down. He was saying like Will Smith's dad voted in the last Philadelphia election, even though he's been dead for however long, or just really weird stuff like that. And then saying, what do you think, we're stupid or something? So of course, every late night host that day was like, yeah, we do. It was one of the most interesting and one of the most 2020 things I've seen all year. Yeah. We'll look back on this in several years and say, yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
So I actually wonder two things. I had heard that Giuliani was found in a compromising position in the new Borat movie. Yep. Apparently he signed the waiver form or whatever you signed to be in a movie, but he was caught with his hand in his pants with
so the deal with that is
reporter or something. I haven't seen the movie, so this is just kind of secondhand.
Yeah. If you like the first one, you probably like the second one. I did watch it, and it's absolutely overblown. Yeah. By the Democrats, which is to be expected. But I think the whole interaction was very much a dirty old man kind of thing. Nothing specifically wrong, nothing illegal, but fucking greasy. Yeah. And the deal was the whole hand down the pants thing is after the interview, they went into this side bedroom or whatever in this hotel, and I forget her name, but the co-star in Borat is this young, I believe, Romanian actress. Mm-hmm. She's 24 or something, and so she's super flirty with him. Okay. As an ambitious young reporter. Yeah. wanting to do good in her job, and she's kind of like touching him and like touching his knee and, oh, you're so funny, and like really sucking up to him.
Yeah.
So she's playing that role, and he's eating it up.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a couple small things, like when we're in the bedroom or whatever, he's sitting on the bed and she's kind of standing next to him, and the way he like kind of reaches out and touches her hip, which was a very light touch, not that big a deal, but still, like, bro, you're an old guy. Don't. It just
you're
looks
also
really
a
weird.
married old man,
Right.
So
And then, so while they're over there, he's taking off his microphone and stuff because the interview is over. And if you have like a wireless lavalier microphone, like a clip-on, it's usually like run down the back of your shirt and stuff. So you untuck your shirt to get it all out, and he was tucking it back in. And because he was sitting on the bed, in order to do it, like you lay back to tuck something in, then you would sit back up.
okay.
Like, so that's the shot of him laying back with his hand stuffed down his pants.
And he's really just tucking his shirt in.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that particular thing, nothing specifically wrong with that, other than everything and just kind of being a dirty old man.
Yeah.
What was hilarious was then Sacha Baron Cohen comes running in as Borat, saying, no, she's too old for you. Basically says, come fuck me, I got a tight asshole.
Oh my God.
At which point, Giuliani is like, what is going on here? He gets up and gets the hell out of there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a funny moment.
So that's hilarious. See, I haven't heard that last part. What I had heard roughly was that he was talking to an actress who was playing a young reporter, but he didn't know it. And he was like leaning back against his bed in the wall in this hotel room, like Al Bundy, like with his hand in his pants, like lecherously looking at her.
No, wasn't that.
And he, and I could, he's a fat old man. I could see that. He just place his hand in his pants, just kind of lay there, and it's disgusting, but it's not unheard of.
Right.
And okay, so that's interesting. It's interesting how much context can play a factor in these sorts of things.
Yep.
Because those are
Nuance, people.
Those are two completely different issues, right? And just to think too that whomever like snapped a photo and was like, creepy Rudy Giuliani with his hand in his pants like a pervert, versus, oh, he's just tucking his damn shirt in.
I think Sacha Baron Cohen might have been the one to release that. And of course, I mean, they got cameras all over the place because they're doing this interview and other cameras. So it wasn't tough to get the shot. But
No,
I think he's the one that sent that out there. And
yeah, I get it. It's funny, but it's also one of those things where like I see that sort of stuff and I wonder, like, I can understand if like the Twitter mob is like freaking out because it's Twitter.
Sure.
But what I don't understand is when you have like supposedly intelligent, high level, say political individuals or whomever, late night talk show hosts or reporters on TV, whoever might have also ate this up. And they're like, oh yeah, this is real. It's like, all you have to do is watch the damn movie to understand that this is a little bit overblown. Like and then you say it's funny and it's inappropriate and it makes Rudy Giuliani look like a pervert. And then you're like, but it's clearly a joke. And then you just move on. And it's interesting how that,
that doesn't get you as many clicks online though.
That's the problem, right? And so we're heading towards, we're already in an era where like this is why it's considered the death of journalism now, is because clicks are what rule. And so there's no reason to tell the truth. And if your medium makes the truth for people, because that's what journalism does, it's specifically designed to root out the truth and then present it to the public.
Yep.
And you lie, then either lies become truth or no one believes you. Which I think is both of those things are happening right now, interestingly. But
everybody reread 1984 and lest we forget.
Jesus fuck. That book gives me nightmares.
Yeah. Incredibly relevant right now.
I read it 2.5 years ago in Hawaii. I was on vacation, me and my girlfriend, and I've been wanting to read that since I was like 12. Just never did. And read it while I was there. It took over a couple of days. And I literally had nightmares on a vacation in Hawaii. Because at every page I was like, oh, that's happening right now. That's happening right now. That's happening right now.
How many fingers, Winston?
Yeah, it's like both the left and the right are doing that. Yeah, the how many fingers thing, and then it's like, what, 6 months ago there was this whole issue on Twitter. Granted, it was started by James Lindsay so he could troll people, but it became a thing where 2 + 2 = 5.
Yep.
And not only was that picked up by the secretary of the of Washington State's like Department of Education. She's a math teacher in Seattle somewhere. She teaches racial math, indigenous math. She teaches a certain type of math that basically looks at math through a racial lens. She not only promoted it to try. She basically was like, how many of my mathematician friends or educators can prove that this is correct, that 2 + 2 = 5.
Yeah, she was like asking somebody, please find a way to make this correct.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. And then some like big ass program also tweeted about it and talked about how it was true. I forget which program. It was like I didn't realize we were going to talk about this, so I didn't look this up, but it was like the Department of Health or some shit. It was the kind of a department where you'd hear it and you're like, not only do you know who it is, but you're like, they did what? They're like actively trying to show that math isn't real.
Yep.
And
well, dude, specifically here in Washington State, the educational legislation and policy that's going on with regards to the critical race theory and all that is fucking frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of research. We talked about this, I know, 2 months ago or so, but I haven't really looked much more into it. It's one of those things I want to do a deep dive into to really understand and sort of separate the the wheat from the chaff, as it were, right? I want to find out what are they doing that is good and bad, because I assume that it's a small amount of good with a large amount of bad. That tends to be what happens with critical race theory, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to assume that that's true, because it could just be a bunch more good stuff than bad. So, like you just never know.
Yeah.
But I don't have high hopes, but what are you going to do?
Yeah. The signs are not encouraging at this point.
No. I'm going to roll it back just a second, though. The second thing I wanted to talk about the Giuliani thing, because you'd mentioned that the late night host had a field day about it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm actually curious. I'm curious of two things. I'm curious what late night talk show hosts are going to do once Trump's gone. And I'm curious if any of them are going to lose their jobs because they have nothing to talk about.
Oh, no, there's always stuff to talk about. And I've seen a couple much more lighthearted digs at Kamala and Joe.
Sure.
But very much on par with late night talk shows as we knew them 4 years ago. I mean, they're always going to go after whoever's in office. That's their job, to make the jokes. And they're going to do that with Harris and Biden. But the energy is different.
I'm sure, yeah. That's the one thing I remember with Stephen Colbert, right around when Trump got elected, is that he'd mentioned, paraphrasing, of course, it's been a long time, but he basically mentioned, he's like, Trump being in office will give me a job for 4 years. That's something to that effect. He's like, just his presence alone will keep me employed for the next 4 years. I think he actually says something along the lines of, I don't need to do anything else but talk about the president. And I don't listen to most of I haven't actually really, I've listened to clips of stuff because my, like people I know, like the late night shows, like Steve Colbert, and then Trevor Noah, is at the South African kid.
Daily Show.
Daily Show. That's right. He took over for Jon Stewart, right? Yeah.
Yep.
I've listened to some clips of their stuff, but I don't find them funny. And I haven't listened to either of them or any of the other people since before Trump was elected. They were actually funny to me beforehand. I remember specifically, I would listen to Steve Colbert a good amount. 7 years ago. He was funny. He had a presidential bid for a little bit of time, like 8 years ago or something. And that was hilarious. Like they were good. And then I just remember the last couple of years, every time I would hear clips, they felt lazy to me.
Lazy? How so?
And I don't have like an example of like when they were like, how it just, maybe what it is that they've actually spent 4 years pretty much just exclusively making fun of the crazy stuff that Trump has done.
Yeah.
And that's lazy. It's like, I'm over it. Like I was over it 3 months in.
You're over it, but most of the other people aren't.
Yeah, they love it. I still get why they're doing it, but part of it is like, every time I hear this stuff, it's like, okay, I've heard this joke. Like it means nothing to me.
Ironically, something I found, because I do like those type of shows, the late night ones. And I found it interesting that if I'll bounce between, say, Daily Show, Trevor Noah, Late Show, Stephen Colbert, who's the guy? Kimmel's okay. Seth Meyers. I like Seth as well. Anyway.
He's the weekend update guy, right? From SNL. Yeah.
And it's one thing I found is before Trump, usually you're going to get a different version of the same jokes. If there's something specific going on in the news, everybody's going to take a swing at it, and that's that. But Trump has done so much crazy shit every day that the late night shows actually have different jokes for different crazy shit he did. It was like an oversaturation of usable material, so they would just kind of pick and choose what they want to go with on the show. And that was like I noticed that 1.5 or 2 years ago. Like, oh wow! Usually they're kind of saying the same stuff, but everybody has got their own material to work with now. And then like a year ago, it occurred to me, or not occurred, but it got to the point where it was getting a little distastefully venomous. It's one thing to poke a little fun.
And that's kind of part of it too, is I felt that with the clips I'd see, like it seemed to me to be like, I'm all for inappropriate comedy. Quite frankly, if they want to be venomous, more power to them. Like they should have the legal right to do so.
Sure.
But it was one of those things where it's like, okay, like first it seemed to me as if all the jokes I heard were the same. They were just picking on the same person repeatedly for all this crazy shit. And then they just started to get mean about it. And it's like, don't you have, there's other things that occur in the US and the world that you could easily poke fun of.
Again, audience response, man.
Yeah, and so
you'd be there going, yeah, and everybody else is like, well, what did Trump do?
See, again, I go back to that.
That's what it is.
I'm just an odd cat, I guess, when it comes to this kind of stuff. But
that's a good thing, though.
Yeah, I really stopped liking it, and I just don't find them as funny anymore. It just seems too rote.
Yeah,
like they're just kind of going through the motions, which is interesting that you found, as someone who's watched it, that they have different jokes now.
Yeah.
That's something that may be worth exploring between the two of us, because I'm actually curious as to how both of those things could be true.
Yeah.
I also listen to so little of it that you're probably more correct than I am in this situation. I don't really pay much attention at all. I'll probably hear a clip once a month. My girlfriend will find it funny. She's like, watch this with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, I mean, prior to this year, because I've gotten a bit more politically aware this year, but prior to that, it was really the only palatable way to get the news.
Sure.
And I know a lot of Americans get their news, like back in the day, it was Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
And everybody says, oh, we're not the news, we're not the news. No, but you're talking about stuff that happened in a way that I'm willing to listen to. Yeah. Because the Fox Newses and the MSNBCs of the world are just tough to listen to, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
For slightly different reasons, but it's just, journalism's been dead in that sense for a long time. But if we're not gonna take it serious, like pure journalism, well, let's just tell some jokes and I'll hear what's going on. And I do my best to separate the facts of a thing that happened from the joke.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is a thing that happened, and I think about that separately versus whatever joke they're making, as if the joke itself were the news, which can be tough to do.
Sure.
You know, if you're just, especially if it's late at night and you're just relaxing, you're ready to go to bed and just taking in some information. But just to try to be, cognizantly aware of that as a way to get some entertainment, but also get some information and know the difference between the two.
Yeah, no, very, very true. And you were talking about, and I brought it up as well, about journalism being dead. It seems to me that there are a few journalists left, and they're almost all exclusively independent now.
Oh yeah,
which is crazy to me. And
you have to be.
Barry Weiss recently left New York Times
Mm-hmm.
and was, of course, pilloried by the New York Times for it, but she's independent and she does good work. What's it? Is it Alan Greenwald? No. He's the guy.
Glenn Greenwald.
Greenwald. Yeah, he's the guy who broke the
Snowden.
and then he recently broke the some emails between Joe Biden's son and someone like a few weeks ago, and then as a result, his company that he founded got angry with him, and so he stepped down.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
This was like 3 weeks ago or something.
Okay.
And then Chris Rufo is a Seattleite. He's an independent guy, and he's the one who he pretty much single-handedly is the one who's responsible for bringing to Trump's attention the issues with critical race theory and getting the executive order signed.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So he's been working for probably a good 2 years now with actual people in actual organizations or in government, getting the documents, the slides and stuff they're being told to learn, and he's been sent email exchanges from people asking questions about it or telling people what they can and can't do and how to say stuff. It's been pretty intense.
What's his name again?
Christopher Rufo, Rufo.
Okay. I'll have to check that out. I gotta give a shout out to Matt Taibbi as well.
I was going to say he was the next
Rolling
one.
Stone, but he's an independent voice.
Yeah, he's independent now. I think
he is. He's not with the Rolling Stone anymore.
I think he writes for them. He might still, but I think it's more of like an at-large.
Okay.
All these people have their own websites, so it's hard to tell if like they're employed by the people or not because they have their own websites and stuff, and they do their own, articles and things of that nature. But yeah, it's and then the other one is Andy No.
Yeah.
From Portland.
Yeah.
Who's of them all is the most I feel the most scared for him. He basically, so for those unaware of Andy No, he's like a independent reporter journalist down in Portland. And for pretty much the last like 6 months, from what I understand, he has gone out every night during the peaceful protests that have burnt down
mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah, that have burnt down a large portion of Portland and in the surrounding areas, and followed them around and recorded it and then posted it on Twitter. And there's actually a picture online somewhere, probably a couple, but Douglas Murray, from the British fella that a lot of people don't like, he was in the States to do some interviews and stuff, and he went up to meet Andy No, and there's a picture of them two on either side of a graffiti against like a brick wall or something that says "Murder Andy No."
Wow.
Yeah, and Andy No said that he's received probably, I think it's like either half or a dozen death threats, and he's reported them all to the police, the Portland police, and they've done nothing. And there was like a reporter reached out to the Portland police and was like, "Is this true?" And they're like, "We do have a record of him filing multiple, reports, but it's hard for us to do anything when it's anonymous." And then the reporter basically was like, "Have you reached out to Andy No yet to get his side of the story?" And then they had no comment. Nice. And so the general consensus, and this is, this could be conspiratorial, I think it's probably correct though, pretty easily correct, is that Andy No is shining a light on a lot of the terribleness that's going on. Mm-hmm. And we can get more into what is going on and like how it's coming about, because it's all goes back to critical race theory at some point. And people are understandably upset about that because they only want to show the good things. But the city's corrupted in as much as they're not following up to help him. My assumption is because they know who he is.
Could be, yeah.
And it's like, who's going to help him? Like, if they're not on board, like the police are asked to stand back. The police commissioner is also the mayor, who is basically allowed a lot of this to go on, from what I understand. I could be wrong on that, but my impression is that he has essentially rejected any federal help and then has allowed protesters to go about doing things up until the point that the protesters surrounded the condo he lived and then lit it on fire.
And then he got his place.
Yeah, then he got a little bit angry.
Yeah.
But Yeah, and so he's definitely one I want to shout out to, because of the rest of them, he's the only one I've heard of thus far that seems to be in the most amount of danger at all times.
Yeah, he's square in the middle of it.
He's literally in the middle of it, and he's not backing down. There's like a wife and 2 kids. Yeah, it's like when I actually first heard about him, it was at the beginning of the grievance studies affair with James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian. They had held I don't remember if it was before or after that they were found out about, but the 3 of them had held this talk at Portland State University, which is in Portland. And Andy Ngo, I believe, had helped put it together. And interestingly, this is kind of an aside, but in the top background, writing a piece on it was a very young Tim Pool, who didn't have any followers at the time. And now he's getting bigger.
Yeah.
But he was there. I remember because I'd found out about him later, and then I had watched that video, and he's in the background, like with this beanie on, writing it up in the top left-hand corner of because it's a
lecture hall kind of
lecture hall that's like raised, like a theater, basically, like a movie theater where it's raised up high, and he's in the far back. But yeah, he's been around this stuff for a long time, and I remember seeing some Twitter, like a Twitter feed is what it's called, where you have like multiple people responding on Twitter.
Yeah.
I don't
thread,
know.
actually. Twitter thread for that, but yeah.
Okay, Twitter thread, where it basically was just a bunch of whomevers, activists who were like talking about how to find Andy Ngo and eliminate it, murder him.
Wow.
And Andy Ngo had like found it all, probably because someone told him about it. And then he went to their Twitter, found all the exchange, the thread, got it, and then posted it on his Twitter and was like, "This is what people want to do, like bring it on, bitches." And he's had some. I've watched quite a few of his iPhone videos that he's put up on YouTube, and he'll like explain what's going on, and he just kind of follows everyone around, and it's fucking crazy.
Wow. I'll have to look him up then, because I've only heard kind of about him in passing or other people talking about him, but I haven't seen a whole lot of his work.
Yeah, no, he's really good. I really like him. And then Chris Rufo's the other one that I really enjoy, just because of the work that he's doing to kind of highlight some of the problems with critical race theory, or really just like diversity style trainings and things. There's some good things, but there's also some other things that are very, very problematic. And he's like, "Hey, send this stuff to me so that I can give it a platform, and we can kind of decide if and when, there's problems." He also came out with a movie recently called America Lost. It has to do with he goes around a couple of Rust Belt states and talks with people about poverty, essentially. And it's mostly people of color. The whole purpose was to sort of settle on that. And I was going to watch it this weekend. And then he has another smaller documentary about the poverty in San Francisco. Oh, okay. Because it's huge. Yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely absurd there. Yeah. But yeah, I'm on Chris's Twitter right now, trying to find out. There was a couple of things, some other things that he had brought up that were crazy and problematic. But yeah, whatever the case, we're going to see more and more. I think we'll see more and more independent journalists trying to search for truths that people don't want to hear.
We have to. I mean, the whole thing, as far as journalism goes, the mechanism that allowed or led to the internet basically killing journalism is local news reporting.
Yes.
So it's not the big news outlets, because they get their stories from somebody on the ground in a local town who did the legwork and, created the story, or not created the story, but reported on the story. And then the bigger organizations, the Associated Press, stuff like that, can then spread that around. But without the budget to have local reporters doing the hard work to get the story, then we don't have the information. And slowly but surely, as the local papers get shut down, there's nobody left to do quality reporting. Yeah. And now we are at the point where a news outlet, ABC News or whoever, will literally quote Twitter as a source, which is ridiculous. Yeah. And that's becoming more and more commonplace. And that's why I say, at this point, journalism is dead. There's a handful of people that are fighting the good fight and we want to support them any way we can. But the reality is journalism as we knew it, at least, is no more.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because there's a huge potential with the internet to get good news out there, but we've lost the journalistic standards and integrity. It's great that anybody can whip out their phone and become a news reporter and stream live on Facebook. It's fucking amazing. But
the quality has to be there.
Quality has to be there. If you're going to take that as fact, if you're going to take it as news, it has to meet those requirements of just journalistic standards, which, is not happening. And nobody's arguing it, or not a lot of people are arguing it and saying, hey, wait, this is not a credible source. They're like, oh my God, did you see that video? And I heard this, and I'm going to quote Twitter, and I'm going to bounce around this echo chamber, and nobody's going to learn anything new.
Yeah. So Christopher Rufo, I found the tweet of his I was looking for. He's been sort of unearthing some of the stuff that's been going on in these diversity trainings. And the one in particular that I'm going to talk about concerns the King County library system.
Okay.
So in Washington State, the largest library system in the largest county, King County. He had called them out a few months back over what seemed to be racially segregated training programs. He had got a hold of some photos some people had taken where
I think I heard about this. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
And I actually can pull up the actual pictures here. DIE sessions, diversity, equity, and inclusion sessions, in one of the rooms at the King County Library System. It was people of color, and then in another room it was people who are white.
Yep.
And so he was like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
So he tweeted and was like, what the fuck? And the King County Library System had sent an email out to their staff addressing the issues. And it's a pretty long email, which I can read if you want. Probably take me about 5-10 minutes. But the main thing of it is that they recommend, they basically tell the staff to, instead of using the term racially segregated training program, they should use the phrase caucused listening sessions.
Again, reread Orwell.
So at the bottom of his tweet, he's like, Orwell would spit out his coffee.
There you go.
But caucused listening sessions. And I think it actually mentions, I'm trying to find it as I talk here, but that they had requested basically the company that they use, which is Racial Equity Consultants, REC, had recommended that they do what is essentially segregated sessions so that people of color would feel comfortable talking about their issues, with the assumptions that they wouldn't feel comfortable talking about them with white people present.
Yep.
Which I found, on one hand, I understand. Like that doesn't surprise me, at all. But at the same time, like it needs to be, this may sound very radical to a lot of people, but I have to articulate this because this is what I think is actually happening. They're literally trying to justify segregation.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Even if the idea, quote unquote, is good, that's the whole point. And that's terrifying. And it's, I can see it. Part of my head is like, well, they want people to feel safe. So segregation's okay. Like if I remember correctly, my history is rusty, but if I remember correctly, part of the reason for one of the many reasons for segregation in America was so that white people would feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was done out of a kindness to help white people feel safe.
Yep.
And so this strikes me as the exact same thing. It's just reversed.
There is much reversal going on.
Yeah, which isn't to say that maybe there isn't a point, and that maybe we shouldn't even consider it. I don't think it's a terrible idea to consider, but that doesn't mean it should not be considered. Maybe there's an argument to be made. However, it would seem to me that that's a a very bad thing to start doing, because then all of a sudden you're justifying legitimate segregation. This actually, I didn't grab the article for this, but this actually occurred at least, it might still occur in New York City public schools. There was at least one school that I can think of that there was an article written about where they were teaching kids. This is like 8 to 10-year-olds or 8 to 12-year-olds. It's like I think it's elementary school, or maybe it was junior high, 7th and 8th grade, or 6th and 8th grade. But throughout the day, they would segregate the kids, and they would put all the white kids in one room and all the black kids in another. And they would basically, with all the white kids, they would break down and explain to them how they're racist and how their ideas are racist, and how, they need to be better humans and not be so racist towards all their black student, their peers. And then the group of black students were told how great they were and how much they should treasure their African heritage or heritages, because there's a plurality of them. Because
big place.
Well, Africa's the most genetically diverse place on the planet, and they were given cupcakes, and then they were also told how white people are racist against them. But they gave them cupcakes to kind of reaffirm their. This is why it stuck in my mind, is because they gave them cupcakes and told them that they were they were good people and they shouldn't feel ashamed and all this nice positive things, some of it, and some of it's a little odd to teach 10-year-olds, but whatever. And then after these classes, they would put them back into the rooms together. And so you have all these kids who maybe they do, maybe they don't understand what's going on. But one group was told that the other group doesn't like them. And then the other group was told that they, even if they don't believe it or feel it, they don't like the black kids either. And so everyone knows that the whites hate the black kids. And then the white kids come in after an hour of getting shamed, and they see that not only should they hate the black kids, because apparently they have to because they're white and it's inherent, but the black kids get cupcakes. And apparently part of the article was about how upset people were over the whole thing. Like all the black kids were very angry when the white kids showed up, and then all the white kids felt guilty and bad and were sad because they didn't get cupcakes. And it's apparently a couple of them went home in tears and told their mom that they're a bad person and that's why they didn't get a cupcake. It was just this whole thing that there was so much going on.
Yeah.
I bring the cupcake thing up as a funny joke, but they actually did it apparently. And I think there's just this mess. Anyways. So yeah, caucused listening sessions. And then the email that went out to everyone, it was all supervisors and managers. They just talked about how to address the issues with a couple of Q&As and stuff. But it was very interesting, and it's terrifying to think that's happening in our state.
Yeah, currently.
I mean, a King County library system is half a mile up the street, the Bothell Library. Yeah. So, it says, please be sure to refer to this session as caucused listening sessions rather than racially segregated and or trainings. Words matter in this case, so please be mindful.
Words definitely matter.
And see, that's the other part of it, is that of that entire sentence, the most Orwellian is the caucus listening sessions, right? Obviously, they're literally repurposing words.
Yeah.
The actual, I think, phrase that means that is the most terrifying to me is the words matter. That actually scares me more than them demonstrating that words matter.
Yeah.
It's the fact that they say it out loud and open. And, for me personally, because, I'm a big stickler for words and how they're used and how sentences are structured and how arguments are framed. And, I said this multiple times before, but a big part of why I'm doing the podcast is to articulate my ideas vocally and poorly so that I could re-articulate them later better.
Yeah.
Because it's hard. Not only because thinking is hard, but because words matter. It's important. And so people talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how they're all really good things. And if you or I, let's say, were to push back on somebody about what those things actually mean, because I don't find any of them to be actually fundamentally, I don't want to say good. I think that the ideology that's under the substructure underneath that phrase, which is basically critical race theory, among other things, is not inherently good. And so those words are used, they're repurposed to mean things that people don't realize that they mean.
Silence is violence, baby.
Yeah. And then but let's say we make a fuss and someone's like, you're being crazy. Like diversity is obviously a good thing, or equity is great, or inclusion is great, or whatever. And it's like, words matter. They fucking matter. And then here we have an email from like a supervisor who probably, well, I'm sure that they actually understand what it is that they're talking about, but they are the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the King County Library System. So this is intentional on their part, I'm sure, but they literally admit it, words matter. And so when I saw that, I was like, yeah, exactly. There are problems. And all of these words are being changed and repurposed, and people don't want to believe it because they have an idea of what these words mean. And they're like, no, they don't mean something else. They mean what I think it means. And it's like, no, this is why words matter. It's because they're intentionally choosing words that they can multi-purpose for their own purposes and change at will, for that matter.
Yep. To
confuse the public. Because confusion is actually part of the goal here. I've talked about this a lot before, but this is rooted in queer theory. The whole point of queer theory is to disrupt and subvert and to dismantle and or to queer, as they like to say, things that are normal or normative or heteronormative. So as a brief example, being gay in and of itself is to be queer because you're not straight.
Sure.
Right?
By definition, yeah.
By definition, yeah. Right? That's the simple example, but it extends everywhere, and it's very political. And so repurposing these words creates confusion in the natural state of our heteronormative, patriarchal Western civilization, is that we want to not have confusion. We want people to understand things. So if you think you understand what a word means, for me to queer it, I change the definition of the word.
Yep.
It's that simple. And that may seem kind of crazy. And that's the point. Like, that's actually the point of the thing, is that it should. That's why it's being done, is because no one in their right mind would say, oh, these words don't mean what I think they mean, because it would be crazy to do that. And that's what they're doing. And I say they for lack of a better term, and or a person or peoples to
go ahead and you can say it. Those people
call out specifically, mostly because it's rooted in theory. This isn't one individual person's opinion. And this person is, looked at as like the fairy godmother of everything, or something like that. And, the theory has been developed this way for a very long time.
It's a defined tactic.
Yeah. By, hundreds of incredibly intelligent critical theorists who've spent their lives developing what is essentially critical theory, critical race theory, post-colonial theory, queer theory, basically every iteration of feminism, Black queer theory, Black studies, Native American studies, and indigenous studies, indigenous critical theory, Black critical theory. Like it just goes on and on and on and on. All of those things. The theory is very similar, at least with what we're talking about here, amongst all of them. The theories broadly a lot of them have nothing to do with each other, but they tend to get mixed and matched depending. But yeah, it's interesting and a little scary whenever I see these individuals speaking their truths, as it were, like just saying what they really mean, and then no one
says shit. Yeah, they just let it go. Like that was normal or something. Yeah.
And it's like, no, I'm sorry, but it's not normal, and anyways, yeah. So that's a little scary. That's a thing that's been going on in the state of Washington.
Oh, hey, so before the podcast, we were talking earlier about your thoughts on kind of the underdog status of the this election process. You want to expand on that?
Yeah. So I've always been kind of an odd kid. And so I've always kind of felt like a bit of an underdog in all the things that I've undertaken in my life, just with struggles that I face personally. And I've mentioned before on the podcast, but like my dad was in prison when I was a kid, and I was did really well in school, but I had attention issues, and aggression issues and nervous energy and things like that. And so I've always been someone who's just kind of rooted for an underdog, just naturally. I like stories like that. And
Rudy.
yeah, and like I like seeing. I like the hero stories where the individual starts out imperfect and actually quite bad at what they do, and then they somehow they manage to throughout time overcome the circumstances and succeed in spite of their failings. It's one of the reasons I like Harry Potter is that he's kind of a average student. He's actually not that intelligent compared to his parents. He's dumb because his parents were apparently really smart, and but he's got a unique set of characteristics that he cultivates over 7 years, and it allows him to win. He's an underdog. You know, he's the whole deck is stacked against him in that book. From day one, he's supposed to die, right? And he finds that out in the last book, and he still goes on and wins. Anyways, so in and around, and then shortly after the election results came in, and you see this all the time, and so it wasn't surprising to me, but I noticed that, you know, a lot of people, news reporters and things were talking about how Trump was losing and how they were, you know, condemning him for all of his failings and things, and how he's going to lose the White House and all the stuff that's true and predictable and probably correct because he's an ass. And I remember at one point, before I kind of processed it, I remember at one point being like, he's the underdog. I want him to win. Like, I just want to see what happens when he pulls this thing out. And then I was like, holy fuck, what? Because I don't want him to win, and I didn't vote for him. Like I mentioned last podcast, I voted for a third party, and but it was like that underdog mentality. Like it just clicked in my brain, and I was just like, "Oh yeah, I totally want him to, you know, kick the shit out of those guys. They can shove it, you know." And then I was like, "Wait a minute, no, I don't." I mean, I don't want Biden to win either, but it was one of those things where for like just a brief second, I was like, "Oh, like this is the underdog. Like I hope he kicks their asses." And then I was like, "Wait a minute, who is this person? I don't know if I want him to kick their asses."
Well, you know, I think that sentiment is a big part of what got Trump in office in the first place.
Yeah.
People just want to stick it to the man. They're sick of all the bullshit politics,
Yeah.
and they wanted to shake things up a bit. Which that part of it is understandable to me. Not with Trump. I think that's a fucking bad move, and it seems like that is the case over the last 4 years. That was a bad fucking move. He's done a few good things, but not the guy we want running shit, as I've said before. But there is definitely a sense that politics are fucked. People don't like it, so they want to stick it to the man.
Yes.
Which is tough because as we've seen in the last 4 years, just because you're sticking it to the man doesn't mean good things happen. And now, you know, you could say the man is back in office because the Democratic Party is the same old, same old. So we're going to back to what was in many senses. So I think that, you know, that's something that now we need to put our focus on.
Yeah.
Is to hold this new administration accountable. And that's not to say, I mean, I as much as I have misgivings and disagree with Biden Harris, I absolutely felt an enormous sense of relief when they basically called it for him.
He's already texted me, yeah.
And it'll be nice to get back at least to something that it feels more normal. It feels more predictable, even if it's the same old bullshit. We can come together and hopefully work on getting the bullshit out of it. But this chaos of the last 4 years, you get kind of numb to it after a while. But when it's all said and done, you're like, oh, holy cow. So I'm giving myself this week to really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And then next week we'll start hammering Biden.
So to that, the push has already begun by progressives, like the far left Democrats. I'm going to use that for today, at least the term progressives, if it comes up again, to describe those who are much further left than the average Democrat, right?
Yeah,
And so
okay.
House and Senate members that I can think of who qualify under progressive or AOC. I don't remember the names of the three other women that she's a part of, and they're known as the Squad.
The Squad, yeah.
Those
Ilhan
four.
Omar.
That's right.
And,
Rashid
Talib, yeah.
Rashida Tlaib.
Tlaib.
That's right. And then there's one other. Ayanna Pressley, I think.
Okay. Yep.
I think
Sounds right.
Okay. So I'm going to use progressives to refer to some of those more far left policies.
Sure.
There's already a push. There's like a list of people that they want in office that different groups do. One of the calls is to create a new office within the government dedicated to climate change that reports directly to the president.
On the face of it, I don't see a problem with that.
So I see a couple of issues. One is the legal issue. I don't know much about like legal issues, but having direct access to the president seems to me to be a pretty powerful thing. But I'm not familiar with most branches of the government don't deal directly with the president. They have to work their way up through the chain of command. And so I'm not sure legally if there's any issue with just creating a brand new branch of the government or department in the government and then just having their boss be the president.
My guess would be, and this is probably the specifics of reports too. So you would have this new organization for climate control. One person is going to be heading that up, and that person answers to the president. So it's not like they can pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Joe, I need you to do something for me." But if you reverse that and Joe says, "Okay, you need to work on this," then the person will work on that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the actual logistics of it is, my secretary calls his secretary and leave a voice or whatever and get it all coordinated. So it's not like a close, intimate connection, but a direct accountability. And the president would be particularly aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
Like that's on their radar.
Right, exactly. And I don't know this for sure, but I believe like there's a few departments that have direct access to the president, and I think that they're mostly military. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to see how, if this comes to fruition, what that direct access to the president looks like compared to every other department that does not have direct access.
Right.
I could see there being a battle for like, well, we're also important.
I think my hypothesis would be a benefit of that direct access would be to remove potential layers that would hinder any sort of work getting done. Hypothetically, if they have to report to Mitch McConnell, not a lot's going to happen.
So this brings me to my second point. And so what strikes me as funny is the notion that the best way to combat climate change is to put it in the hands of the government. That actually, when I read this, I was like, that actually seems like a really bad idea. It's like, first off, personally, like I don't like large governments. I want the smallest government possible. So I'm naturally going to lean against whatever this is because I don't think there should be more departments in the government. I think there should be less. But moving that aside and saying that it's necessary, when has the government ever been more efficient than the private sector in anything?
Well, I think that would be that to be most effective, they would actually use that concept and use tools that would incentivize the private sector.
See, so
with like carbon taxes and stuff like that.
So the problem that I see with that is whenever that sort of thing is done, it creates a monopoly in that industry. This happened with railroads in particular back in the day. Certain railroad companies won government bids to build railroads across the country, and they were given basically like credits or taxes, tax write-offs or something to that effect to do it. So it's in their best interest to do whatever the government wants in order to keep getting those things. And once they have them, they don't want to get rid of them, which means they're the only ones who get government contracts. So they get all of the contracts. Because as the government expands what they're doing, the one company is going to continue to do everything necessary to make sure that they're getting all the government contracts. And then it pushes out private business.
I don't know necessarily if something like this, and again, it's not like I'm up to speed on it,
Sure.
but
Me neither.
At first blush, I don't think the main core of this would necessarily be government contracts, but rather setting restrictions on the private industry. So like if you're going to fucking burn coal or some other fossil fuel, and you got carbon taxes and things like that to de-incentivize.
Yeah.
And if you're working on different green energy products, then you get some tax breaks, but still let the market itself compete.
And that's going to be the tough thing is like, so you think about like a big company that can afford to do whatever the government wants to do for the incentives, the tax breaks. And then they start doing everything necessary. Some small companies may not be able to actually do that. because of their size, right?
Or maybe they can't. I mean, if they're getting the same breaks, it's going to be at a different scale.
Yeah,
but
so maybe they're not. Maybe they don't have the size to actually handle what I can see running into problems. And so the thing you bring up about letting the market work, that's difficult once the government gets involved, because people are just naturally going to do. If you get a government contract, they overpay.
well, again, not the contract
Yeah.
though, is what I'm saying. No government contracts. The government isn't paying anybody to make fucking solar panels.
But they would
They
do
probably
that.
are, but in general,
They would do that
policy-wise,
they would do that for tax. If you got tax credits, that'd be the same thing.
no, because anybody can get that tax credit. If you make solar panels, then you're going to pay less on your taxes.
Got it. Okay. So
Go sell some solar panels.
okay. So instead of being like, okay, well, we're going to pick you because you do solar panels and we think you do them better than he does for the tax credits. It's everyone who manufactures the stuff.
Yes,
So
exactly.
they're
Everybody gets access to the same.
okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So I could see that functioning better. Again, I'm woefully ignorant on this kind of stuff. Like most government policy, it's convoluted and super confusing. But that was like something that I thought was interesting. It just seems to me that a more efficient way to handle this problem in particular is just to allow very wealthy people who care about it and who are in it to just fix the problem. Like I would much rather give Bill Gates and Elon Musk a couple billion and tell them to go figure out climate change than to give it to whomever Joe Biden chooses to run the Department of Climate Change, which I believe it's the theory, or from what I've heard, the rumors are that they're going to bring Jay Inslee, the governor of this state,
Washington,
the state
yeah.
that we're in, to do climate change shit. And then if that comes to fruition, he would be the first one up. So I would much prefer that Bill Gates and Elon Musk get a bunch of money than Jay Inslee
Yeah.
to handle these problems. And that's the other thing too, is it's like it isn't clear to me that there isn't the government needs to have a hand in this, in as much as there's a department where taxpayer money goes to pay people to do God knows what to
Yeah.
solve a problem that I would just trust with way more intelligent people with way less restrictions, like Bill Gates and Elon Musk, to use them again, or any other billionaire who gives a shit about this. I mean, hell, George Clooney's a big environmentalist. They don't have the restrictions that a government employee has. George Clooney can go wherever the fuck he wants, whenever he wants, on at least one private jet, and can go solve problems, as can the other two. But a government employee, they're stuck within a bureaucracy, following rules and procedures and things, and it'll naturally be less efficient because of how it's structured. That's
for sure.
That's
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
the downsides to the government. Now, to be fair, it does still work over time, even though it's wildly inefficient. Like it's one of those weird wonders where I often wonder, I'm like, how does the government get anything done? And it's because it takes a while,
Slowly. That's how they
slowly
get it
but surely, and it's super inefficient. But I feel like if you were to make it more efficient, it would just create more problems for the government. At least that's from what I understand. That seems to me to be the argument against like actually making the government efficient, is that doing that creates too many other issues. And I'm not really sure what they are offhand, but
Yeah, I would say tackle those issues and let's increase the efficiency.
please,
But no, as far as climate change, I mean, really, it's a market problem at its very core. It is because we, as a human society, we need energy, so that's a must. And right now, the cheapest way to do it is fossil fuels.
Yep.
And that's the financial incentive that keeps those things going. So if we can start tipping the incentives towards other forms of energy and let those brilliant minds do the research and development, build the factories, create the new technologies
Yeah.
strictly for their own benefit, give them their own incentive. You're going to become a rich dude if you pursue this. Then I think that's the type of incentive structure that would really actually tackle this problem. But it's not going to be just the government saying this is what you can or can't do.
Yes. Yeah.
It's more, this is what we're going to reward and this is what we're going to penalize. Do what you see fit.
It's also not clear to me too that, and again, a lot of this is ignorance, but from what I understand regarding, say, coal production and fossil fuel production versus natural gas and like wind and solar and stuff like that, it's not self-evident to me that coal production is so much worse as to no longer be necessary. like for the environment. Like a lot of what I hear is that if we ban coal producing and fossil fuels, then we could save the climate. And it's like, that's all it would take. It seems like it's more, there's more to it than that. And I also feel like I assume we've come a long way in our ability to produce coal and fossil fuels and whatever's, in terms of the overall carbon emissions that they emit. Like I'm sure that it's better now than it was at the turn of the 20th century.
Sure. Clean coal.
Right, exactly. And so it would seem to me that, like with most things, probably the best thing to do is to try and find a way to mesh both together. Because from what I understand, the problem with like solar energy and wind energy and the like is that some of it is about as not much more, but fairly close, similar in cost to like coal production. But the problem is that it can't be used all the time, because there's only so many sun hours in a day, right? So it's hard to store
energy storage,
and use over time. And so you have these two issues of, well, I can produce coal whenever the hell I want, I can use it whenever I want, but it's bad for the environment definitely more so than say, wind and solar, which have no emissions from what I gather at all. The problem, so that's, you want to go to those, but the problem is that they don't work all the time. And what happens is you run out of them, and you don't really have a way to store them. And then if you need some more, there's a high demand for it, so the market goes up. That's what happened roughly in California like 9 months ago, or maybe it was only 6 now. I have no concept of time anymore. But when they had that huge power outage and they didn't plan for multiple contingencies. So I think what they're supposed to do is plan for like every day. They're supposed to plan for like one major problem. And so they always want to have on hand a reserve amount of energy for the state up above a certain threshold, like a factor of 1, whatever that means. So you'd have 1.1, or you'd have one factor above whatever the normal day output is. So that means one thing goes wrong and you have enough power to cover it all. But like 3 things went wrong and they didn't have enough power. And so now they're stuck spending triple the price, quadruple the price, 100, an order of magnitude more in cost to get all this energy from neighboring states, from like Oregon, Washington, and whatnot, because they don't have a way to store or keep throughout the night. Let's say, as an example, their solar. From what I understand, that's how that works. And so you could just push the two together. Just use coal part of the time.
Well, that's kind of what they're doing now. And I know that Biden has caught some flack for, Trump was trying to call him out. Are you going to get rid of fracking? Going to get rid of fracking? Going to get rid of fracking?
No. He said no.
Yeah, he says in order to phase it out. Yeah. So that's what you're talking about. And you're absolutely correct. We have to phase it out. I mean, the reality is fossil fuels are the most portable and energy dense way we have to utilize energy. But that's not to say that if we incentivize the new and upcoming companies and the Teslas of the world to work on battery technology.
Yeah, fusion is the other big one.
That's a ways down the road. But if we get to fusion, that is game over for energy. If we ever actually achieve a stable fusion generator, that would be the Industrial Revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the internet revolution
all put together
times 10.
Yeah.
Like that would basically become free energy, and that would, I don't know, that might destroy the world just because of the political disruption that could potentially come from that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about like phasing out fracking. I mean, that's $1 trillion a year business. Yeah. Oil production, right? That's $1 trillion a year, I think, in the U.S. Maybe it's globally, but it's a lot of money.
It's a big ship to turn.
And it's like you're phasing this ship out, right? Or you're trying to get these companies to repurpose all of their workers to do something that they don't normally do, which is hard to do. And so, and you have a lot of very wealthy people at the top who will become less wealthy. Like, I think 4 out of the 5 largest oil companies in Russia are owned by Putin and his right-hand fella. I forget the guy's name. There's like a guy, and he's got a guy that owns them, and he, as part of the government, like I think he owns them personally, and the government also owns them. They share ownership, and he leads the whole thing. But it's Putin's guy.
Sure.
And then there's one other company that is outside of that's owned privately, and I'm pretty sure the dude's been arrested and in prison multiple times, and for basically nothing, because he's a competing company. And so getting rid of that, I can see being very tough. There's also the issue of, I think it's studies, economists have shown that, people, like a group of people need to, like a country needs to make, I think it's like $6,000 a year or more, something like that. Maybe it's 16. Not a lot of money for the U.S., but worldwide, it's a good amount of money compared to poverty's like $1 a day or $2 a day or something. $2.35 a day, I think, is poverty. So something like that. So like double, triple that before the country will start to or be able to care about the environment, because they're too poor otherwise to care.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this kind of stuff, I don't see how this is going to be enacted in the incredibly poor countries in the world, where their most pressing concern is, how do I not die of starvation or genocide or by wild animals?
It's economic, dude. I mean, as soon as electric power for whatever purpose becomes cheaper in total than fossil fuels, then that'll be it. Once batteries are cheap, once they can store a tremendous amount of energy, and that technology is growing, some really promising things on the horizon with carbon nanotubes and graphene and things like that, that there's a potential to get some freaking amazing batteries. So, imagine your car doesn't need to be charged but once every 2 weeks or once a month. Like that kind of power, that's going to, and which means you can do cross-country trips.
Yeah.
And you can store a month's worth of energy on these 2 batteries hanging on your wall down in the basement, and all that stuff. That sounds like sci-fi right now, but we're heading in that direction. Once we tip that, and let's say it's all created with and we'll even say a nuclear fission.
Yeah.
But the nuclear technology going on right now, before if we ever hit fusion, that's the holy grail. But even still with fission, there are new reactor designs that are way safer. They have fail-safe measures in place where currently, like Fukushima, the reason that was a problem is because it required cooling 24/7, 365, like pretty much all the other reactors in the world right now.
Yeah.
So if something goes wrong and that cooling gets disrupted, then you get a meltdown.
Yeah.
The newer technologies, they're much smaller, on the order of you would have one of these reactors in every town. Mm-hmm. And if something goes wrong, if anything goes wrong, it shuts itself down with no requirement for power whatsoever. Basically, it has to have power to run, and if that power gets cut off, then everything shuts down safely.
Yeah.
These are the types of things that are being worked on. Now, of course, nuclear power is regulated to the nth degree, so we're still many, many years from this stuff actually coming to market. But the technology is there. It's very, very promising.
Yeah.
Most people are skittish about nuclear for good reason. But if you take a close look at it, the potential for energy production and the risk would be worth it.
Sure.
So let's say we get a good handle on nuclear. We've got batteries that last forever, and they're super strong, and they run all our stuff. At that point, when it gets that kind of cheap, everybody will naturally, without having to yell about the environment, I just want a cheaper car, man.
Yeah.
I can't be buying gasoline, dude. You still buy gasoline? That shit's so expensive. And once we get to that point, that's when we get there. I think the reality is it's the larger industries, it's the airline industry, trucking.
Yeah.
It's not your Honda Accord that we're worried about killing the environment. It's these larger things. Jet fuel is insanely, polluting or whatever, adding to the greenhouse effect.
I heard something, I probably got this number wrong, but I heard that one plane flight, like the 6 hours it takes to go from Washington to New York, let's say, or something like that, is the equivalent in terms of carbon emissions to a newborn baby up until their 18th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Something crazy like that, where it's like a very long period of time. It would take the average human to just simply emit that many carbs through whatever, farting and eating and going about their day and, whatever else that they would do that emits carbs. Break number 2 pencils and drive a car. You can tell I know what it means to have carbon emissions. But yeah, that may not be the actual number of years, but it was like a very long time. I remember being like, ooh, that's fucking crazy.
So it's the big industries that really need to be addressed.
Sure. Yeah. And
I got to take a bio break. I'll be right back.
yeah, no worries.
Think of something profound.
We are at 90 minutes, by the way. So we could actually, if you wanted, we could wrap it up, or do you want to keep going?
I'm going to keep going if you want. If you have more to say, or we can wrap it. But first things first, I got to pee. I try to hold it.
No worries.
I did have something else I wanted to touch on.
Sweet. I got a few more things on my list, I think, but I don't know if I'll have the energy to get to them, but I have them on the list to see.
You roll them over next time. Okay, so to bring it back to kind of the election topic and post-election and all that, something I noticed that is not very encouraging. The response from the Democrats and kind of the na response to what appears to be their electoral win is potentially very dangerous. You mentioned AOC earlier. She tweeted out, "Has anyone made a list of all the people that were, worked for Trump or whatever?" Basically trying to blackball anybody that was associated with Trump.
Yeah.
That's a terrible idea because he did garner over 70 million votes. Just under half of the country agrees with Trump. So if you're going to try and dox all these people and not allow them to have jobs, you're effectively saying the same thing to half the country. Versus, bring it down a level or three.
Yeah.
Let's all behave as Americans rather than red versus blue. And I'll commend Joe that he, or at least the speechwriters, keep repeating, it's not red states and blue states, it's the United States.
Yeah.
And assuming that they actually act with those intentions, that really is what we need. Because just because the Democrats won doesn't mean that's it. Trump got into office for a reason. And it wasn't, the problem was not Trump. Trump was a symptom of the problem. So this is still the country that we live in, and these are our fellow countrymen.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. First, I think that President Trump got more votes than Obama did.
Oh, is that how that turned out?
I know that Joe Biden did, but I'm pretty sure he got more votes than Obama did when Obama was reelected. I'm not positive on that.
I believe it.
But it's at least close if it's not true. Yeah. So he's definitely gotten the most votes out of any loser. Second,
He's the number one loser.
Yeah. Second, I believe that a large number of people in the government are, they're like, what's the term? They're lifers. They're not chosen by the president. And the new president gets to choose someone new. Like they work there regardless of who the president is.
Yeah.
So she's already alienating a bunch of people who've just been career bureaucrats.
Right.
So that seems interesting. The third thing, and probably the more important thing, is this is exactly what the Democrats did when they lost in 2016. This is the exact same thing. They lambasted and ridiculed and called out and made fun of and picked on all of the people who voted for Trump and claimed that they were morally reprehensible and terrible people. But half of the country voted for Trump.
Yep.
And so they have this is the same damn thing where it's this situation of how the fuck dare everyone vote for Trump? You're pieces of shit. You're redneck hillbillies. I remember hearing that one a couple of times because it was assumed that, I think correctly, that a lot of the Midwest voted for Trump, but the assumption was that they're all, redneck hillbillies who, or white nationalists, racists, or whatever, things that aren't
reprehensibles.
Things that aren't true. And it's like, I remember saying this to some coworkers, 4 years ago now. We were talking post election and whatnot. And I remember saying to them, at some point the Democrats will take back the White House. There's always going to be a back and forth. It's unlikely that Republicans will continue to win until our democracy is demolished or the earth ends or whatever.
Yeah. And that's a good thing. Those opposing forces,
they're needed,
in balance.
But as soon as that occurs, because it'll probably happen soon, you think people are just going to forget that the entirety of the Democratic Party just called them and their family and everyone that they know and their whole entire town, reprehensible pieces of shit and racist and sexist and xenophobic and homophobic, like all these epithets that probably by and large are actually not true. Yeah, like people aren't going to forget that shit. And it's like, oh, once we win, you come back to our side and we'll be friends. It's like, fuck you.
That attitude is what got him in office in the first place.
Exactly. And they're doing the same damn thing when they win. And it's like, they don't learn.
It's a huge lack of self-awareness.
Yeah, and I think we talked a bit about that last week, in fact, about this lack of self-awareness. But yeah, it very much is. It's like I think we talked about it last week in regards to the Democrats expected to win, to grow their lead in the House in particular in terms of House representatives, and it actually shrunk. They still have a majority, but they have a smaller majority.
Right.
And then they expected they expected they would take the Senate, and right now it looks like that won't be the case. I think, but it's like their perception of reality is just different and wrong. And this is another example of that. It's like I don't care if you don't agree with somebody else. You don't alienate them for the purposes of saying nah, I win. Like that, you do that when you're in school. It's how you get punched in the face. Right?
It's elitist.
It is.
People fucking hate it. I fucking hate it.
I do too. Yeah. And I can't stand it. It's like, you guys aren't perfect. Grow the fuck up. Like, you're supposed to be the people who run our country. That's your job. And here you are pretending, acting like you're the 13-year-old bully at school.
Yep.
And it's frustrating to see. It's like, you don't need to. I referred earlier in the podcast to the term Trumpian. And it's like, that's become a thing where it's like, this is Trumpian behavior where you're just being divisive and an asshole to be divisive and an asshole.
Yeah.
And there's no other purpose. It's actually just detracting from any future gains you may have. It's very short-sighted.
Very short-sighted.
It's very impulsive. It's the opposite of what you would expect from a mature, rational adult.
Yep.
And we've talked a lot about this over the podcasts, this one in particular, last one, and then just all of our other podcasts. But there's this pattern that I see of, and I could be just drawing at straws here, but there's this pattern that I see with this lack of accountability, this lack of maturity, growth, normalcy, all these kinds of things just seems to become more and more prevalent on the left. And it's the opposite of how it's supposed to be. And the reason I think I might be grasping at straws is because I read a lot about queer theory, and the entire point of that is to disrupt normal behavior. And then I see all these things that are the opposite of normal behavior that normal rational humans would do. Like, make fun of and laugh and call out again 4 years later, or for 4 years, really half of the country. And it's like, the only reason you're either stupid, you just don't have a firm grasp on reality or what you're out, how people view you, or you're doing this on purpose.
I think ultimately it's not with a, excessively malicious intent.
Not with everyone, at least.
Yeah. And I think it's, it's fair to say it's been a very divisive situation. So like I said, there's a sense of relief if you happen to be on the blue team this go around, and that's all understandable. But, moving forward in a successful way as a country is going to require us to work together. And unfortunately, kind of going back to the podcast we did on the social dilemma, it's an uphill battle because it's easier and easier to hear only the things that you want to hear, only things that reaffirm what you already believe. Mm-hmm. And we need to come together and cross those boundaries and realize, maybe rediscover, that even though someone has political differences, we have way more in common than we have differences. Yeah. And that's really what's being lost. And I think, if you were to address one thing, whether it's, climate change, the racial relations, all of the, but first thing is the social media situation, the social dilemma. I think that is the very first thing, because that is driving all of everything else. It's how we communicate. It's how we try to make sense of the world. And if it is so divided and so siloed from each other, where we don't have an agreed upon shared reality. Mm-hmm. If both sides can say, yes, 2 + 2 = 4. If you can't do that, then none of it's going to work.
Right, exactly.
And not only that, not only will it not work, but it leaves us incredibly vulnerable for a tyrannical leader to take over.
Yes.
Because if you can't agree on reality, then basically might makes right.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One will be a backtrack, but I'll catch back up. So we talked last week a little bit about this, about the infighting amongst the Democrats because they expected to get a lot of gains and they didn't. And the main woman that they were upset about was the chairwoman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Sherry Bustos. And I think we talked a little bit about how they were angry at her because she said she knew the path to get them a bunch of gains, and then they lost. So they were understandably angry. It was her job. So after the House and Senate gains failed to materialize, she has decided to step down and will not run, or she's not going to step down, but she's not going to run for re-election at the end of her next bid, in part due to the pressures that she faced as a result of this failure. So that's interesting.
Sounds like probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Somebody's not in touch.
I have a couple of articles about AOC. She's had a lot of things this week, a lot of different things. One is an article where she explains that she thinks that the reasons for Democratic losses were because they did not spend enough, or in some cases, she said that there were some who didn't spend any advertising money on Facebook. So we're talking about the social dilemma. And she's like, some of you didn't spend exactly $0 on Facebook marketing, which apparently is not true. I didn't look into the veracity of the claim that it was or wasn't true, but I had heard that it actually is not true. But that was her claim. And that, what I thought was interesting about it is she's like, we lost all this because you guys didn't market effectively. And that's a counter to both Republicans and Democrats who blame the Democratic losses due to progressive policies, pushes, progressive issues, things that AOC herself would push forth, like the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, free college tuition, following movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, things like that. Those are like direct quotes, or direct paraphrasing from what people have said. And so I thought it was interesting that a bunch of people leveled some, complaints about why the Democrats didn't win more seats, and they're like, well, you're following these movements that are polarizing for whatever reason. You are pushing abolish the police, defund the police. You're pushing the Green New Deal. and it's too socialist. That's why he lost. And then like one of the progressives that's pushing all this is like, no, it's because you didn't market enough with Facebook. And there's like a complete disconnect. Like literally they have nothing to do with each other, which again brings me back to what I said 3 minutes ago about interacting with reality. And it's like disconnect. So in addition to that, AOC was quoted in an article. She condemned the Lincoln Project, which near as I could tell is basically a former collection of Republicans who were against Trump. So it's just a project or a group for them to essentially sow discord amongst the people with regard to Trump and voting for him and then to get him voted out of office. And AOC apparently tweeted, it's not too late for them, the Lincoln Project, to do the right thing. Lincoln Project should take the loss, take the L, is what she said, because it's Twitter, so I think she abbreviated. There's space constraints on that, right? What? There is, isn't there? I'm pretty sure there is. I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, sir. 280 characters.
Okay. So Lincoln Project should take the L and publicly pledge to give a lot of their fundraising to the people who actually make a big difference. Whew. So she's actually condemning a group who she actually shares a common enemy and a common goal to remove that enemy from the office, which is another thing. It's infighting, basically. Even though they're Republicans, she's still like condemning a group that's doing what they can. She also doesn't specify who the other people are who actually make a big difference. My assumption personally is Stacey Abrams from Georgia, but she's a woman who helps push Georgia blue.
Dude, she's a fucking political powerhouse.
Yeah,
is what she is.
So my assumption, just reading between lines, is she's referring to at least her, if not other women, like black women in particular, like her, because Stacey, news I can tell, is a black woman.
She is, yeah.
Yeah, but I'd never heard it said, so I didn't want to assume, you know. But in response, Reed Galen, the co-founder of Lincoln Project, he had said that, you know, we are pro-democracy, the company, the project. I think that progressives would be surprised how much we agree upon. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah. And so it's funny. It's like she is condemning for whatever reasons. I'm sure there's more to it than that. And he's like, look, I'm sure we have more in common. Like, let's bring it together. Now, I actually think that Mr. Galen is naive in his assumption that they're all pro-democracy and that they have a lot in common. It's not clear to me that either of those statements are true, but I could understand why he would say that, make those connections, but I don't think that they're necessarily true. But it just reminded me again of this infighting and calling people out, and I don't get it. I just don't. It doesn't seem effective to me unless the purpose is to be destructive, which is partly why I disagree with what Galen said. I think that he's being too charitable and optimistic.
No, I would agree with that. Even if someone has some extreme, like they're socialist, you still have a tremendous amount in common. I mean, we want to be able to provide for our families. We want to live in a safe neighborhood, stuff like that. So I would agree with that. I lost my other thought. Dang it.
It's all right. I have some more, and then if you think of it, you can butt in. Okay. So the things that I find inherent in Mr. Galen's quotes is the assumption that, like the Lincoln Project, progressives, however you want to define them, are also pro democracy. That's the first thing I thought was interesting. It's like it's not clear to me that they're necessarily pro democracy, and the reason for that, and we've talked a lot about this, but is that a fundamental core tenet of critical race theory, and in particular queer theory, is the disruption, the dismantling, and the destroyment, whatever you want to say, the tearing down of the very fabric that holds Western civilization up, because it's considered to be the problem.
I think statistically that's still a very small minority of people.
It is.
They're just really loud.
It is, and they're very loud, but they also have a lot more power than I think people realize. And where they lie politically is the progressive. Like that's where they're at. Yeah. And so it's not clear to me that it isn't like they're moderates or conservatives that are hiding themselves. Like these are straight up very liberal, far left progressives. That's where they fit. And even if it's a small group, they have power. And I don't find it correct to claim that someone who wants to destroy, let's say, or remove or tear down and rebuild our society is pro-democracy.
Oh no, by definition they're not.
right? By their own definition, they would be, because the democracy is corrupt and systemically racist and controlled by white people, and it's a patriarchy and all those things. So I can understand the logic from that point of view of we actually are the real democracy. But in normal land, in like the real world, they want to tear down the democracy and rebuild it. And so
well, they don't want to rebuild a democracy. That's them, and they would even state that
Sure.
if they're openly socialist, then this this is the problem with democracy. This is the problem with capitalism. See, let's tear it all down. We're going to do it better.
It's not clear to me that's correct, first off. And so that's why I say it's charitables. I feel like we've talked a bit about this over the months or in the podcast, but people will engage, like Mr. Galen is doing, with the assumption that they're playing the same game as the person that they're engaged with, that they know the rules, and that there's no ambiguity with the rules. So like if you and I have a rational argument, it's safe for me to assume, because I know you, that you're pro-democracy because we've talked about it.
Right.
But if I don't know that, and I just assume that you're also pro-democracy because of something that doesn't necessarily state that you're pro-democracy, and you're playing a totally different game where democracy isn't even part of the rule set, that's a problem. Let's say that I'm a soccer player and you and I are going to play a game. Our teams are going to play a game on a field. We agree to a game, but we don't specify the game. It's just assumed by me that it's soccer because that's what my team plays. But you don't like soccer. You think it's inherently bad for whatever reason. And you and your team play rugby.
It's oppressive.
Yeah, it's oppressive, let's say, to bring it into this. And so you and your team play rugby because you like it better. It's less oppressive. But you guys play rugby. But you decide to not tell me and my team that you're playing rugby because you know that it'll give you an edge. And then we play a game, and I expect there to be fair play, and you and all your buddies are just beating the shit out of my soccer team because in rugby you can tackle, and in soccer you cannot, right? And so that's what I think is going on a lot of the time, is there's two completely different games being played. And in this case, Mr. Galen, I think, might be susceptible to playing soccer when he's playing against a rugby team, in that it's to make these assumptions, I think is bold. You're just assuming, in some part of me is like, well, you should assume people are decent and also have similar values. Like, and there's some truth to that. But if I've learned anything from all the stuff that I'm reading, it's that sometimes how, like when I hear certain verbiage, when I hear people do certain things that don't really make sense, when I hear grown adults act like 12-year-olds for the simple purpose of saying neener, it makes me question what their actual motivations are. And I don't just brush it aside and say, well, they're probably a reasonable person, it's okay. It's like, no. I got to delve into it because it's entirely plausible, and in fact, probably actually is possible that they don't have good intentions, or at least their value structure is set in such a way that how they view the world is different. So they're playing a different game, and that's scary.
I'm going to agree with both. And here's what I mean by that. I absolutely agree that there is a chunk of the population playing a completely different game, and that's not feasible. We have to have an agreed upon rule set. It's just plain not going to work. But I also think that what was his name again from the Lincoln Project?
Sorry, say that again.
From the Lincoln Project, what was his name?
Reed Galen.
Reed Galen.
Or maybe it's Galen. It's Galen.
Okay, that dude. I will agree that, again, talking majorities, so not any one individual person, but people as a group, I would say the majority of the Democrats would fall into the camp of we have more in common than we don't.
100%. I agree with that.
And I think that this minority of disruptive, progressive, socialists, whatever, we can't ignore them, but we can't take them as serious as they would like us to. Like, okay, yeah, that's really fucking cute. Now you just go off to the side and we're actually going to run this country because most of the people are enjoying this democracy. So we're going to go with that. That's what's here right now. And if you don't like it, maybe you should just wander off, but you're not going to fuck this one up. I think that's a more inclusive way to try and heal the country.
My pushback would be, so first, I like that option. I think you should let people that have bad ideas talk and let them talk long enough to where everyone can hear their bad ideas, which is roughly what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
The pushback that I have and the problem is that we are past a point as a country where I don't know if that'll work anymore, because enough people who believe this stuff, whether they fully, truly, these are evangelical preachers, that's how much they believe it versus just, ardent churchgoers, like as a difference. Whatever the case, there are enough people in enough bureaucratic positions or positions of, let's say, small power, right? So they run big parts of governments, or it's pretty much every HR department in every single large company in the country is part of this. Those kinds of things. They have the ability to affect change. And so at this point, it isn't so much that you just let them talk until people stop listening. It's like, well, if people stop listening, they still have the ability to affect change. So they're just going to put in the policies they want until people stop them.
Right.
And that would be the pushback, is that to the degree that what I've just said is actually true, it would seem to me to be that ignoring them is a bad idea. Though I understand why, and I think it's honestly usually the best thing to do. This is how I handle Trump, is I just don't listen to him because I don't give a fuck, because he says dumb shit. And I just, personally, I assumed, probably ignorantly, that everyone else would be like, oh, he's an idiot, and no one would listen to him. And that was wrong, obviously, because half the country voted for him. And they probably had their reasons, and I'm not condemning them for that. But I've kind of viewed it as a similar thing. But it isn't clear to me at the moment that we can afford, unfortunately, to do that. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Okay, no, I like that. And let me clarify my position. I definitely agree that hyper progressive shit that's going on, including making its way into our educational system and all that, it is absolutely affecting change, and that I think should be combated fervently. But I think the important distinction is not to take them as the majority of the Democratic Party. Like, this is a very small group of people with some very bad ideas. They need to be addressed. But if you happen to be a Republican, don't make the mistake of thinking anybody that's Democrat believes all that shit.
Yes.
Just like you don't want Democrats to think just because you voted Republican that you're a fucking racist.
Yes.
Because you're not.
Right, exactly.
So that's the level of, look, we've got more in common than we have that are different. That's where we need to come together and say, okay, these are some things that the actual white supremacists, let's get the fuck rid of them.
Sure,
These people that are peddling this critical race theory, that's very divisive and racist in and of itself. So we got to take care of that.
Yes.
And then as a country, we can discuss these other issues.
No, I'm on board with that. And I would say that add in a healthy dose of skepticism, and I'm on board.
Beautiful.
Because that's how I would look at it, is like, I want people to talk and to speak and to say dumb shit so that everyone could say, that was really dumb, shut the fuck up. That's what I want. Or they could say it nicer, or they could be way more mean if they felt it necessary, but that's what I want. But at the same time, if people have the power to actually affect changes and make policy changes and implement things into the country, it's like, I'm naturally skeptical anyways. And so, like, I'm skeptical when I hear certain language and I'm like, wait a minute. I'm not saying the person is, like, to be clear in this case, I'm not suggesting that AOC is an anti-democratic, anti-democracy, critical race, theorist peddling individual, nothing to that effect. I don't know her or her, like, I don't know what she wants at all. But I hear this kind of language and I'm like, wait a minute, I got to think about it. And that's where I always use the phrase, like, it's not clear to me, because there's enough muddiness in the water for me to be like, well, maybe. Maybe that's her position. Maybe the people around her, that's their positions, and they're kind of dictating or helping what she says. Maybe other people that aren't even related to her saying similar things, and they do mean this stuff. Because you're right, it's almost impossible to tell who really is pushing this. Like I said, who are the evangelical, missionaries, the
Robin DiAngelo.
yeah, the fervent pastor, versus the once a year on Easter churchgoer versus the, or even the zealous churchgoer who takes notes every day. Like that could be one of these individuals too, versus just the everyday layman who goes to church. Like it's hard to tell. And it's a very small minority of the people who actually believe that stuff. And most just want to be this is an assault on niceness. This is a slight tangent, but I'm really angry now. This just pissed me off because it popped into my head and it made me angry. The ideology is predicated on basically infecting the niceness meter in people and then multiplying. Like it's a virus. And in fact, I forget the author who wrote this. Not a very big author in critical theory, but someone who wrote either like a paper or a book nonetheless about it. But she actually described the ideology as cancer, as like cancer, but like in a good way. It wasn't like this thing is cancerous and it's bad. It's like, I want this virus to be cancerous, to like infect the body and multiply uncontrollably. Like things like, it was a weird, like parasitic description, but what it's doing is it takes people who are kind and nice and want to be nice and makes them feel guilty. And in their niceness, they want to follow something to be a good person. And then the more nice somebody is temperamentally, the more likely they are to believe it and adhere to it more, even if they don't understand the underlying ideology behind it, which is a problem too, because you hear all these things. We talked before about a lot of the sayings and stuff that come up. They're like hard to combat. It's like no one's gonna combat Black Lives Matter and be like, they don't matter. Like, no one says that because that's wrong. So it's a great name for a movement. It's like,
it's effectively a cult is the thing.
Yeah.
It's
the indoctrination is very cult-like.
The indoctrination and the ability to sequester communication. Like how many times have you seen somebody from the BLM group trying to actually talk to a cop or talk to somebody who's got a Trump shirt on or whatever, and and they come running up, no, you don't talk to them. And by cutting off that communication, that is very fucking culty.
What's I think his name's Daryl Jones. He's a black musician, a blues musician. He was on the
Daryl,
he was on the Rogan podcast. I forget his last name.
Yep, that guy.
So for those people who are unaware who are listening, Daryl, and again, pardon the name, the last name, but he has made a habit of, over the last like 10 or 15 years, he has converted something like 100 and some odd.
I think 200.
200 members of the KKK. They've like renounced the KKK, and he actually has a collection of all their hoods in his closet for all the people that he's converted away from the KKK. And short story, he started it all because he didn't understand. Like, he's like, well, if they just meet me, like, they're not going to hate me because I'm black. Like, which is a very naive way to think about it, but it's also like the way that worked. He approached a bunch of people, and it's been working. And he said, and I'm going to get this a little bit off because I don't have the article in front of me, but he had talked about how it was easier for him to do that than it was to deal with progressives. He had a run-in with like progressives, and they like lambasted him.
Yeah,
I think they lambasted him for actually talking to members of the KKK to, I think, give them a platform. They like freaked out though, called him a whole bunch of names, and he's like, he's doing more than basically every single person in this country to help stop white supremacy by converting actual white supremacists from white supremacy to like a normal way of thinking, or, you know, to a non-supremacist way of thinking.
That's his whole fucking thing in a nutshell, really.
Yeah. And it's like, find me a person who has convinced 200 people to no longer be racist or whatever. It's like, no, he's literally doing more.
Yep.
And he still gets shit because he talks to white people.
Exactly.
And it's like, are you fucking joking? Like, we need more Daryls in the world.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Quite frankly.
Yep.
And that's the kind of grassroots stuff that actually needs to be put forth, and people need to be taking advantage. People need to be doing. Yeah, it's very interesting shit, and it scares me. You asked last week a little bit about what I'm kind of worried about with like with Joe Biden being president. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is this slow creep of language change.
Yep.
This slow creep of newspeak. That's what startles me, is that I'm genuinely concerned that we're just going to slowly, probably more rapidly, but see these incremental changes, and people are like, that's not crazy. They don't mean that. And then move forward. And then all of a sudden people are still going to have a way to move.
Yeah. No, believe what they say. They do mean it.
And again, to reiterate, I can't overstate this enough, and this is why I'm skeptical, is that the people who kind of, not everyone, but the ardent believers of the woke ideology, mostly the theorists, the academics who write and create this stuff, but they're people below them who like fervently believe this to be true and understand the literature. And to some degree, a lot of the people who don't, some of the more ardent supporters that don't really understand it, they have a completely different worldview than the rest of people. That's the key to a lot of this stuff, is that everything I'm saying is crazy because in a normal conversation or a normal world, everything that I say is crazy. What I'm saying right now, like because it goes against how we would normally conduct ourselves. And that's the point. They have a different way of looking at the world. And so this is all their normal. And the whole point is to not be normal in our normal. They also reject it because of its inherent everything, its inherent whiteness. I mean, that's funny, but I mean that seriously. Yeah. That's one of the problems with Western ways of knowing, is that they're white. They're saturated with whiteness, which is in part how systemic racism comes about. Roughly speaking, there's more to it than that, but that's roughly correct. I mean,
it's ridiculousness, and we need to get the fuck rid of it.
Yeah.
But it's not everybody.
No, it's not.
It's not even it's not that many people. They're just really loud
and powerful. And
we need to come together. We need to talk to each other, talk to your neighbors. We need to get news from multiple sources. So get out of your echo chambers. I'm gonna say anything is just get out of your echo chamber. Just take a visit. Go listen to some Fox News or go listen to some MSNBC just to see what they're saying. Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
You're probably going to agree with a little bit of it, even if the tone is distasteful, because it pretty much is for all of them. But it's important to understand what reality that the other person is constructing for themselves and try to meet them somewhere in the middle, because we are all in this together.
No, very true. And that's just a good advice for anyone you have a conversation with, is people actually do look at the world differently because we're different humans.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as like, it's referred to as like objectivity, right? Like an objective way to view the world. And then you could think of it as like a meta subjectivity, right? You take all of the different subjective views of the world and then you extrapolate commonalities. And then you have, roughly speaking, you have the objective universe. That's near as I can tell, that's one of many ways to explain objectivity, is that it's just what do we all most like? Because there are some people who don't believe that the earth is round, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you reconcile the subjective viewpoint of the flat earth theory versus the objective viewpoint or subjective, let's say, quote unquote, view of the earth being round? You can't. You have to figure out which one's right. And so a lot of people have postulated that the earth is not flat, and then they've figured out ways to test that.
Yep.
And therefore it wins until there's an idea that shows that it's no longer flat or no longer round and that it's actually flat. Like that's the whole point. And so you want to figure that out in any conversation. Assuming that someone thinks the way that you do is a surefire way to actually end a conversation badly or start a conversation badly, because they may just not. And really what that comes down to is it comes down to asking questions. That's it. It's just, you got to ask a lot of questions and really try and figure out what it is somebody believes. And then I like your idea of listening to a bunch of different things. I always try and read a bunch of different books, and I'm going to give you an example. I'll give you 6 examples because I have 6 or 7 books on the way. So tomorrow I should get the book On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. You know, I've actually talked about this.
Oh yeah, no, I've got the audiobook. It's great.
Yeah, and so that was referred to me by both yourself and by a professor at the UW, Daniel Chiro, after I read one of his books and then emailed him about it. He said, read On Tyranny. So that's coming with a book called Intersectionality, Key Concepts by Patricia Hill Collins, who's a legend in the intersectional feminist universe. She's a big player.
I think I've heard her name thrown around.
And then I have Critical Race Theory, The Key Writings That Formed the Movement by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's the creator of the phrase intersectionality. She wrote the page in 1991, I think, called Mapping the Margins, that talked about it. I have How Democracies Die. That's coming soon. I'm not sure exactly what it's about, but it was recommended.
Probably in the title there.
Yeah.
Something about democracy dying.
I love it. And then the next 2 books I have coming are Is Everyone Really Equal? And an introduction to key concepts in social justice education, which is by a woman named Özlem Sensoy, and then Robin DiAngelo. It was one of the first books Robin DiAngelo did.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to check that out. And then the book I've been waiting for a while, it's called Being White, Being Good. White Complicity, White Moral Responsibility, and Social Justice Pedagogy, which is pedagogy is basically like how things are taught, by Barbara Applebaum, who's also a big player. She's much more radical than most, though, from what I understand, but she's a big player in queer theory and feminism, the like. She's a radical feminist.
Okay.
So I'm excited to learn about being white and being good.
I'll let you take the hit on those, man. I could maybe stomach 1 or 2 of them.
No, I'm doing them all.
That's tough stuff.
It's
good work you're doing, man.
I'm trying. Like, I took a break of reading this sort of literature, the critical theory style literature, for like a month, and just read a bunch of other books. And then I was like, you know what? Like, I need to keep reading it so I don't lose it.
Sure.
You know, and it's like there's so many books that I've been wanting to read that are on the list, and I'm probably gonna have a problem with all of them. You know, but that's the whole point of this, is like, if I don't understand what it is of the other people are trying to say, how can I hope to talk to them?
Yeah.
And like,
you want to be able to articulate their point better than they can.
Right. Exactly. And a lot of what's being said, like in particular with Barbara Applebaum, white complicity, white moral responsibility, and social justice pedagogy, this is directly related to what we're dealing with. White complicity and white moral responsibility are things that they get tossed around all the time on the news, right? Silence is violence is white complicity. Like, white silence is violence. That's literally what white complicity means, right? The white moral responsibility, I can guess at what that means, but I'm sure it's something that I should morally do as a white person that I'm probably not. And then social justice pedagogy is, how do we teach kids, basically, and college students, how to be activists? I'm paraphrasing, but that's going to be basically what that means. Because social justice is in and of itself political. That's the whole point. I'll end on this. This just reminded me of something, the political part. It's been said quite a few times by different members of the Black Lives Matter movement, like the different peoples in charge of different places, that it's not a political movement. Yeah, I have that remark that as well, but they've said it a lot, and there's really been no evidence thus up to a point that it's inherently political. I'm sure there's some things that some people have said, but recently, I guess, the London, UK chapter of the Black Lives Matter movement made an express statement that not only is their movement political, but that they actually want to be included as like a party in in like the voting process or something. Like they came out and they're like, we're uber political, deal with it. And that reminded me of that. It made me chuckle because it's like they're political. They're waiting for the right moment, I think, to unleash the politics, as it were.
That makes sense. I'm going to counter that with something that I think would be a value rather than keeping an eye on the critical race theory and how crazy that could get. I think the correct direction for talking about race in America, a great example of that is uncomfortable conversations with a black man. And that is hosted by, and this will show how little I pay attention to sports. It's a football player, last name's Ocho, like Emmanuel Ocho, I think.
Okay.
I'm sure the entire audience is laughing at me now, but that guy.
I don't know who that is either, so you're fine.
But he brings on white folks. He's had like Matthew McConaughey and other celebrities. He'll bring on an entire family. He's brought on like a mixed family, white parents, black kids, things like that, to just openly talk about race stuff, and not to call people racists or wail on the patriarchy or any of that. It's like, I'm a black man, you're a white dude, let's talk about this. And I think that's exactly the conversation that we as Americans need to have.
Sure.
Because we do have race problems in America. And the best way to get beyond those is just plain exposure. Just listen to black and white people interact. Do it yourself if you can. Make some black friends, or make some white friends if you're black and you don't hang out with white people.
Yeah.
Oh, that's probably not the case. You can't avoid the white people.
We're everywhere.
Yeah. But just to have those uncomfortable conversations and be around each other. I think that's what's going to heal that portion of our problem in the country.
So you're saying that we should have desegregated diversity training sessions instead of segregated?
Yeah.
Or caucused
that's the direction
learning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No caucus.
Jesus God. All right. This has been episode 12. Post-election ?
We made it to a cool dozen.
We have made it to a dozen podcasts, which is absolutely absurd. Yes, this is the end of episode 12 of the Beyond Red and Blue podcast. That's all I have. Thanks for listening.
All right, everybody. Take care. Have a great morning, afternoon, or evening.
Agreed. Good night, everybody.
Bye.